I walked into the luxury restaurant already knowing I was late but not knowing I was about to be used. My parents were seated comfortably, plates empty, wine glasses still cold at the rim, the kind of table that tells you the celebration happened without you. My mom looked up and smiled. That familiar, effortless smile she always wore when she wanted something without asking for it outright. "Oh good, you're here," she said. "You don't mind paying the bill, right?" My sister laughed softly, already relaxed, already certain. No shock, no hesitation, just expectation. That was the moment everything inside me went quiet. I wasn't invited to dinner, I was summoned. I wasn't late, I was perfectly timed. They had eaten, enjoyed themselves, and waited for the one thing they needed to arrive: me. As I stared at the untouched check folder in the center of the table, I realized something I had never allowed myself to admit before. I wasn't a guest. I was the plan. My name is Chloe, and if you asked my family to describe me, they would all say the same thing. She's easy. Easy to live with. Easy to rely on. Easy to ask for things from. They always said it like it was praise. Like being easy meant being good. Growing up, I didn't question it. I thought it meant I was mature, understanding, flexible. I thought it meant I was loved. When I didn't argue, my mom would smile and pat my hand. "See?" she'd say. "Chloe understands." When I didn't push back, my dad would nod approvingly, as if silence was proof that I was responsible. No one ever asked what I wanted. They just assumed I would adapt. And I did. My younger sister Emily never had to. Emily had opinions, strong ones. If she didn't like something, she said it. If she wanted something, she expected it. Family plans shifted around her moods, her schedule, her preferences. When she raised her voice, people listened. When I stayed quiet, people relaxed. I learned very early that peace in our house depended on me not taking up too much space. If Emily complained, it was a phase. If I did, it was unnecessary drama. So I stopped. I became the daughter who didn't need much. The one who was fine with leftovers, fine with last-minute plans, fine with being told instead of asked. I told myself it didn't matter, that I didn't mind, that being low maintenance was a strength. By the time I moved out, that habit was permanent. In my early 20s, the favors started appearing, never all at once, never aggressively. Just small things, spaced out enough that I could convince myself they weren't a pattern. "Can you grab groceries this time? We'll pay you back." "Can you cover the electric bill? It's just for this month." And I did. Every time, it was framed as temporary. Every time, it quietly became permanent. I never received a thank you that lasted longer than the moment. It was always assumed I'd help again. My dad never asked directly. He avoided eye contact, made a comment about how things were tight, then changed the subject. My mom handled it differently. She smiled. She softened her voice. She made it sound like teamwork. "We're all family," she'd say. "We take care of each other." Emily didn't ask at all. She just expected. If she needed something, she'd look at me like it was obvious. "You're good with this stuff," she'd say. "You always figure it out." And I did. Every time. I told myself it was fine because I was doing well. I had a solid job. I paid my own bills. I wasn't struggling. So what did it hurt to help a little? What I didn't realize was that a little had started to mean everything. They didn't want to handle themselves. I never told them how much I earned. Not because I was hiding it, but because no one ever asked. They assumed I was doing okay, comfortable, but not impressive. I dressed simply. I didn't talk about numbers. Letting them underestimate me kept things calm. It also made me safe to use. By my late 20s, I wasn't just helping anymore. I was supporting, covering dinners, picking up tabs, paying for things that weren't emergencies, just conveniences. No one checked in with me. No one asked if it was still okay. They didn't have to. I had taught them it always was. And sitting at that restaurant table, staring at empty plates and relaxed faces, I finally understood something that made my chest tighten. They didn't see me as generous. They saw me as reliable. And reliable people, I was learning, are the easiest to take from. The restaurant was one of those places where everything felt deliberate. The lighting was warm but low, designed to flatter. The tables were spaced far enough apart that conversations felt private, important. A pianist played something slow and elegant in the corner. The kind of music meant to remind you that this was a place for celebrations, not arguments. My parents loved places like this. As I approached the table, I could tell immediately that I'd missed more than just the beginning of dinner. The plates in front of them were already cleared, wiped clean, the kind of spotless that only comes after dessert. Wine glasses sat half empty, condensation still clinging to the glass. They had taken their time. They had enjoyed themselves. Without me. "Oh, there you are," my mom said brightly when she saw me. Her smile didn't carry relief or concern, just satisfaction. We went ahead and ordered. You know how long menus take. My dad leaned back in his chair, loosening his tie like the night was already winding down. "You missed the best part," he said, not unkindly, not apologetically either, just stating a fact. My sister Emily didn't even look up right away. She was scrolling through her phone, thumb moving lazily across the screen. When she finally glanced up, she smiled. "We saved you dessert," she said. Then she laughed. "Well, sort of." I slid into the empty chair, the only one without a jacket draped over the back. It was still warm, like they had expected me to sit there eventually. The table smelled rich butter, wine, something sweet. The smell of money already spent. No one asked what I wanted to drink. No one asked how my day had been. They kept talking, picking up a conversation I clearly hadn't been meant to join, laughing about a story my dad told twice because he liked the sound of it. Emily interrupted him halfway through, correcting a detail, and he let her. My mom nodded along, pleased, relaxed. They looked comfortable, complete, and that's when I noticed it. The check folder. It sat neatly in the center of the table, closed, untouched. Not pushed toward anyone, not hidden. Just there, waiting. My mom reached for her water glass and sighed, the way people do when a performance has gone well. "The service was wonderful," she said. "Really wonderful," Emily nodded. "Yeah, this place never disappoints." Still, no one reached for the bill. Still, no one acknowledged it. I watched my dad avoid looking in its direction. Watched my mom's eyes flick to it briefly, then away. Watched Emily lean back in her chair, entirely unbothered. They weren't discussing if it would be paid. They were waiting for me to do it. Finally, my mom turned to me, tilting her head slightly, softening her voice. "You don't mind taking care of this, right?" she asked, like it was already settled. "We figured since you're working so much lately." She let the sentence trail off, as if generosity had already been implied. Emily smiled, amused. "Relax, Chloe," she said. "You're always good at handling stuff like this." That word again, handling. I felt something tighten in my chest, not anger, not yet. Something colder, sharper. I glanced around the table one more time. My dad was suddenly very interested in the room behind me. My mom's smile stayed fixed, practiced. Emily had already gone back to her phone. They weren't waiting for me to join dinner. They were waiting for me to perform. And in that moment, something clicked into place with painful clarity. This wasn't about money. It wasn't even about the bill. It was about certainty. They were certain I would show up. Certain I would pay. Certain I wouldn't make things uncomfortable. That certainty had been built slowly, quietly, over years of me saying yes when I wanted to say no. Over every time I chose peace over honesty. Over every moment I told myself it wasn't worth the argument. I looked at the empty plates again. They hadn't been waiting for me to eat. They had been waiting for me to arrive. And for the first time in my life, instead of reaching automatically for my wallet, I stayed still. I wondered what would happen if I didn't do what they expected. I didn't reach for the bill. That alone felt strange, like holding my breath underwater. For years, my body had learned this motion before my mind even caught up hand to purse. Card out, smile on my face. It was muscle memory, habit disguised as generosity. But this time, I stayed still. No one said anything at first. The silence stretched, thin and uncomfortable, like a note held just a little too long. I watched my mom sip her water slowly, eyes flicking to the check folder and then away again. My dad shifted in his chair, crossed his legs, uncrossed them. Emily tapped her phone screen twice, impatient. They weren't confused. They were waiting. And that was when it hit me harder than any argument ever had. This wasn't a misunderstanding. No one had forgotten to ask me ahead of time. No one had assumed wrong. No one was awkwardly hoping I'd volunteer. This wasn't poor communication or bad timing. This was a system. A system built on certainty. The kind of certainty that doesn't need to be spoken out loud because it's been proven too many times already. I replayed the past year in my head, as if my mind had finally been given permission to look closely. The last-minute dinner invitations that always came after reservations were made. The texts that never asked if I was free, only when I'd arrive. The way my mom always phrased things as updates, not questions, were already here. We went ahead and ordered. Join us when you can. When you can. Not if you can. Not do you want to. Just when. Because the real purpose of my presence had never been to participate. It had been to complete the evening. I looked around the table again, really looked this time. My parents' relaxed posture. Emily's complete lack of concern. The ease with which they occupied the space, confident the outcome would be the same as it always was. They weren't anxious, they weren't embarrassed. They were comfortable. And that comfort came from knowing I would clean up after them. I felt something shift inside me, not anger, not sadness. Clarity. I thought about all the times I'd paid without being asked, how quickly relief replaced gratitude on their faces, how normal it had become, how unremarkable. When help becomes expected, it stops being help. It becomes infrastructure. That realization landed quietly, but it changed everything. I had spent years wondering if I was too sensitive, if I was imagining patterns that weren't really there, if I should just be more generous, more patient, more understanding. But sitting there, staring at that check folder, I finally understood the truth I'd been avoiding. I wasn't being generous. I was being used, not maliciously, not aggressively, but consistently. And consistency, I was learning, is what turns kindness into obligation. My mom cleared her throat gently. "Chloe?" she said, her voice still soft, still pleasant. "Whenever you're ready, whenever you're ready." As if there was no other option. As if the only delay was my timing, not my consent. I looked at her then, really looked at her. At the expectation behind her eyes. At the absence of concern for how this made me feel. At the certainty that I would, eventually, do what I always did. For the first time, I didn't feel the urge to explain myself. I didn't feel the need to justify anything. I felt done. Not done with them. Done with the role. I took a slow sip of water, letting the coolness steady me. I didn't argue. I didn't accuse. I didn't defend myself. Because I understood something else too. Systems don't break from conversations. They break when someone stops feeding them. And in that moment, I knew this wouldn't end with a raised voice or a dramatic exit. It would end with a choice. A quiet one. A deliberate one. I just hadn't decided how yet, but for the first time in my life, I knew exactly what I wasn't going to do. I wasn't going to reach for the bill. I stayed seated for a few seconds longer than necessary, just long enough to let the silence settle into the table. My mom shifted first. She always did. Discomfort made her restless. "You okay, Chloe?" she asked lightly, though there was a thin edge under the question. "You look tired." "I am," I said honestly. She nodded, satisfied, like exhaustion explained everything. "Well, whenever you're ready." She gestured vaguely toward the center of the table, toward the check folder that still hadn't moved. That gesture used to be enough. It wasn't this time. Instead of reaching for my purse, I stood up. The movement was small, but it changed the air immediately. Chairs scraped softly as everyone adjusted without realizing why. My dad looked up at me, surprised. Emily frowned. "I'm just going to speak with the manager for a moment," I said, keeping my voice calm. Emily blinked. "Why?" "I have a question." My mom laughed softly. A quick, dismissive sound. "Chloe, you don't need to. I'll be right back," I said, already turning away. I could feel their eyes on my back as I walked across the dining room. The space suddenly felt much larger than it had a moment ago. The pianist kept playing. Glasses clinked at nearby tables. No one else knew anything had shifted, but it had. The manager approached me near the host stand, professional and polite, tablet tucked neatly under his arm. "Is everything all right with your table?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "I just wanted to confirm something." He nodded, waiting. "I wanted to check whether there's an active account authorization tied to our table tonight." His fingers moved quickly over the screen. Then, just for a moment, they stopped. His expression didn't change dramatically. It didn't need to. The pause was enough. "I'm sorry," he said gently. "It looks like the previous authorization is no longer active." I felt my chest tighten, not with fear, but with certainty. "So there's no payment method on file?" I asked. "That's correct," he replied. "We'll need one from the party this evening." "Thank you," I said. That's all I needed. As I walked back toward the table, I noticed how quiet my footsteps sounded against the floor, how controlled my breathing felt. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't panicking. I felt steady. My mom looked up as soon as I reached the table. "What was that about?" The manager followed a few steps behind me, stopping at a respectful distance. "There seems to be an issue," he said kindly. "We'll need a payment method for tonight's bill." My mom sat up straighter. "An issue?" "Yes," he said. "There's no account authorization on file this evening." My dad cleared his throat. "There's usually no problem." "I understand," the manager replied. "But tonight, there is." The silence that followed was different from before. Heavier. Sharper. Emily laughed once, short and incredulous. "Okay, what's going on?" I took my seat slowly and folded my hands in my lap. "I won't be covering dinner tonight," I said. My mom's smile froze. "Chloe," she said quietly, "what are you talking about? I'm not paying the bill." Emily stared at me. "You're joking." "I'm not." My dad leaned forward. "Did something happen?" I met his eyes for the first time all evening. "Something has been happening for a long time." My mom's voice dropped. "You're doing this here?" "I'm not doing anything," I said, keeping my tone even. "I'm just not doing what you expected." Emily scoffed, pushing her chair back slightly. "So, you're just going to embarrass us?" I looked at her. "You didn't seem embarrassed when you laughed last time." Her mouth opened, then closed. The manager shifted uncomfortably. I turned to him. "We'll need separate checks," I said. My mom inhaled sharply. "Separate?" "Yes," I replied. "Mine. And yours." For a moment, no one moved. For the first time in my life, they didn't know what to do next. And that was when I realized something else. This wasn't just the beginning of a confrontation. This was the beginning of the collapse. The moment stretched longer than anyone expected. My mom stared at me like she was waiting for the punchline. Like if she held eye contact long enough, I would laugh, reach for my purse, and everything would snap back into place. It didn't. "Chloe," she said again, slower this time, her voice losing its softness. "You're not being serious." "I am," I replied. My dad rubbed his forehead, already frustrated. "This isn't the time for this." Emily let out a sharp laugh. "Wow, you really picked the perfect moment, didn't you?" I felt my heartbeat in my ears, steady but loud. Every instinct in my body told me to fix this, to smooth it over, to apologize for making things awkward. I didn't. "There was never going to be a good time," I said. "That's kind of the point." My mom leaned closer to me, lowering her voice. "You could have talked to us privately." "I've been talking," I said. "You just haven't been listening." "That's not fair," my dad snapped. "We're your parents, and I'm your daughter," I replied. "Not your backup plan." The words hung in the air, heavier than I expected. My mom's face flushed immediately. "How can you say that?" she demanded. "After everything we've done for you?" That sentence was familiar, too familiar. It had ended so many conversations before they even began. I took a breath. "What you've done," I said carefully, "is teach me that love in this family comes with an invoice." Emily scoffed. "Oh, please. You act like we're forcing you." "You never had to," I said, turning to her. "You just assumed I would." She crossed her arms. "So now you're the victim?" "I'm not a victim," I replied. "I'm just finished." My dad shook his head. "This is unbelievable. You think you're teaching us some kind of lesson?" "No," I said. "I'm teaching myself one." The manager returned, holding the check folders. One thin, one thick. He hesitated, sensing the tension. "Whenever you're ready," he said politely. He placed the slim folder in front of me. The heavier stack went in front of my parents. My mom stared at it like it was written in another language. "This can't be right," she said. "We don't usually—" "I know," I replied quietly. Emily leaned over to look. "Is that really all of it?" "Yes," the manager said. That includes the wine, the additional entree, and dessert. Emily's eyes widened. That's insane. I almost laughed. Not out of cruelty, out of clarity. This is what you order when you're not paying, I said. My mom's hands trembled as she opened her purse. I don't have my card, she said automatically, like she'd said it 100 times before. I know, I replied. She looked up at me sharply. Then what do you expect us to do? I met her gaze. Figure it out. My dad reached for his wallet, then paused, like the motion itself surprised him. He flipped it open, checked inside, frowned. Emily whispered something under her breath. Her boyfriend, who had been silent until now, suddenly stood up. I need to take this call, he muttered, already backing away. No one stopped him. The manager waited patiently, hands folded. Other diners glanced over briefly, then looked away. The pianist kept playing. My mom looked at me again, her eyes sharper now, searching. You're enjoying this. I'm not, I said honestly. I'm exhausted. She swallowed. You're really going to leave us like this? I'm not leaving you, I said. I'm just not carrying this anymore. My dad finally placed his card on the table. The sound it made against the wood was small, but it felt loud. Emily shook her head. I can't believe you're doing this to us. I leaned back slightly. You didn't think about what you were doing to me. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. The manager took the card and stepped away. The table felt colder without him there, like the air itself had shifted. My mom wiped at the corner of her eye, though no tears fell. Family doesn't do this to each other. I nodded slowly. Family also doesn't treat one person like an endless resource. For a moment no one spoke. They looked smaller somehow, less confident. Like the floor beneath them wasn't as solid as they'd always believed. The manager returned and placed the receipt in front of my dad. He signed it slowly, deliberately, as if the act itself carried weight. I paid my share, slid my receipt into my bag and stood. My mom looked up at me, her voice uncertain now. Chloe. Just my name. No demand. No smile. No expectation. I paused for a second, then shook my head gently. I hope you think about this, I said. All of you. Then I turned and walked away. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was abandoning them. I felt like I was finally leaving the role they had written for me. The air outside the restaurant felt different, cooler, lighter. Like I had stepped out of a room that had been pressing down on my chest for years without me realizing it. I stood there for a moment, just breathing, listening to the muted city sounds and the faint music leaking through the doors behind me. My hands weren't shaking. That surprised me. I had imagined this moment 1,000 times over the years, imagined anger, guilt, regret crashing into me all at once. Instead, I felt steady. Tired, yes. Drained, but clear. My phone buzzed before I even reached my car. Mom, you didn't have to do that. I stared at the screen for a few seconds, then locked it without replying. Another vibration followed almost immediately. Dad, we need to talk. I didn't answer that either. Not because I was trying to punish them, but because I knew exactly how that conversation would go. Explanations, deflections, promises that things would be different next time. I had lived through that cycle before. This time, I needed something else. At home, the silence felt unfamiliar at first. No tension, no waiting for the next request. I set my keys down, kicked off my shoes, and sat on the couch without turning on the TV. I just let the quiet settle, and then I opened my laptop, not my work files. The folder I had avoided for years, receipts, transfers, notes, payments labeled groceries, utilities, emergency. Just this once. Each one looked reasonable on its own, defensible, easy to justify. Together, they told a very different story. I scrolled slowly, my chest tightening not with panic but with recognition. Dinner after dinner, bills that had quietly become mine, trips I hadn't gone on but had helped pay for, expenses that had stopped being requests and turned into assumptions. It wasn't generosity. It was infrastructure. I leaned back and closed my eyes, letting the realization settle. I hadn't been helping occasionally. I had been supporting a lifestyle that wasn't mine. My phone buzzed again. Emily, you really embarrassed Mom. I exhaled slowly and typed a single response. Me. I set a boundary. Three dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. No reply came. That told me more than any argument ever could. Over the next few days, the fallout arrived in waves. First, polite messages. "We just want to understand. We didn't mean it that way." Then, sharper ones. "This isn't how family behaves. You've changed." I didn't engage. Without my quiet support, things shifted faster than I expected. Plans were suddenly postponed. Dinners were rescheduled, then canceled. Emily stopped posting photos from places that required reservations. The confidence my parents wore so easily began to crack, not dramatically, just enough to notice. No one apologized. I hadn't expected them to. What surprised me was how little guilt I felt. I had always assumed that setting boundaries would make me feel cruel, that I would lie awake at night replaying their disappointment. Instead, I slept better than I had in years. I wasn't cutting them off. I was just no longer cushioning the consequences of their choices. One evening, my mom called. I watched the phone ring until it stopped. A few minutes later, a text came through. "I don't recognize you anymore." I stared at the words, then typed back carefully. "Me. I think you're just seeing me clearly for the first time." I set the phone down and didn't pick it up again. The system they had built around my silence had finally been interrupted. And once that happens, nothing continues the way it did before. I knew there would be more conversations ahead, more tension, more adjustments, but I also knew this part, the hardest part, was over. I had walked away. And I hadn't gone back. The weeks that followed didn't explode the way I once imagined they would. There were no dramatic confrontations, no public apologies, no sudden realization where everyone admitted they were wrong. What happened instead was quieter and somehow more revealing. Without my automatic yes, my family had to adjust. At first, they tried to pretend nothing had changed. My mom sent a group message suggesting dinner, like old times. Same tone, same vagueness, no question mark. I replied politely that I couldn't make it. She didn't ask why. A few days later, Emily texted me directly. "Are you still mad?" I stared at the message longer than I needed to. That question said everything. To her, my boundary was an emotion. Something temporary. Something I would eventually get over. Me, I'm not mad. I'm just not paying for things anymore. She didn't reply. Instead, my dad called that night. His voice was careful, measured, like he was negotiating rather than talking to his daughter. "We're just trying to understand where this is coming from," he said. "We never meant to make you feel used." I held the phone against my ear and closed my eyes. "I know," I said. "That doesn't change what happened." There was a pause. "So, what do you want us to do?" The old me would have softened then. Would have offered reassurance. Would have made it easier for them. "I want things to be clear," I said. "If we go out, everyone pays for themselves. If there's an expense, you ask me ahead of time. And if I say no, that's the answer." Silence. "I don't want to fight," I added. "But I'm not going back." He sighed. "Your mother is having a hard time with this." "I believe that," I said gently. "I had a hard time for years." After that, communication slowed. Not stopped, just changed. My mom stopped texting me about restaurants and started sending updates instead. Emily stopped calling unless she needed something, and when she realized I wasn't stepping in, she stopped calling altogether. It hurt more than I expected. Not because I missed paying for things, but because I saw how thin the connection had been. How much of our closeness had depended on my usefulness. At the same time, something else began to grow. My time felt like mine again. Evenings were no longer reserved for last-minute plans. Weekends weren't filled with obligations I hadn't chosen. I started saying yes to things because I wanted to, not because I felt cornered. When I did see my family, the dynamic was different. Awkward at first, careful. They watched what they said around me, like they were afraid of stepping on something fragile. In a way, they were right. But that fragility wasn't weakness. It was honesty. One afternoon, my mom and I met for coffee. Just the two of us. She looked older somehow. Tired. "I keep thinking about that night," she said finally. "I didn't realize how much pressure we put on you." I didn't rush to reassure her. "I believe you didn't realize it," I said. "That doesn't mean it didn't happen." She nodded slowly. "I don't know how to fix it," she admitted. I wrapped my hands around my cup. You don't have to fix the past. Just don't repeat it. She looked at me then, not as the easy daughter, not as the solution, but as someone separate from her expectations. It was a start. Not a perfect one. Not a dramatic one. But a real one. I didn't become colder after that night. I became clearer. And clarity, I was learning, changes everything, even when it takes time for others to catch up. For a long time, I believed that love meant endurance. That being a good daughter meant absorbing discomfort quietly, smoothing over problems before they became visible, paying whatever price was required to keep the peace. I thought that if I stayed understanding long enough, things would eventually balance out on their own. They didn't. What changed my life wasn't a fight or a dramatic confrontation. It was a decision. A simple one. I stopped participating in a system that had been draining me. I didn't cut my family off. I didn't threaten them. I didn't try to punish anyone. I just set clear boundaries and stood by them. And something important happened. The world didn't collapse. I didn't lose myself. I didn't become cold. I didn't stop caring. I became honest. I learned that boundaries aren't walls meant to keep people out. They're doors that protect what's inside. They give relationships a chance to be real instead of transactional. If you've ever been the one who always pays, always fixes, always shows up when no one else does, I want you to hear this. You're not selfish for stopping. You're not cruel for saying no. You don't owe anyone access to your time, your money, or your emotional labor just because you've given it before. Choosing yourself doesn't make you disloyal. It makes you safe. If this story feels familiar, know that you're not alone, and that change doesn't have to be loud to be powerful. Sometimes, the quietest choice is the one that finally gives you peace.